Hi everybody, welcome to Art Day. Others call it Monday, but not us artists. Welcome. Today I'm having a voiceover video because, for one, this painting process took a couple of hours, way longer than my usual filming schedule or the schedule that for the length of videos that I put out there. But also I kind of wanted to film during late evening / early night, and I didn't want to disturb Jörn. So I decided, okay, I'm doing this with a voiceover. So I had said in the vlog on Saturday that this is a very special painting that I'm doing here, and I'm kind of also having a little bit of an unusual way of filming this. So you see me here transferring my sketch via graphite paper to my watercolor paper. The clip after that will be how I actually designed that crest there. The crest itself has another funny story, and I'm gonna share it with you. So just before we moved to our new apartment, Jörn and I kind of had just a goofy day and we're just kidding around, and he said, you know, our roommate / friendship situation does actually need a crest to have because, well, it's so special. We're so weird. We need kind of a crest for our shared flat. And I said, okay, sure, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna take his oak tree and my maple tree and make a crest out of it. So now it's almost a year later and I'm finally getting around to painting that crest, having it designed and painting it. And the reason why I just had said his oak and my maple, back in the day when we still lived with his dad, one day we were at the cemetery and he found a little oak that has already sprouted. We took it home, we put it in some lovely soil and watched it grow and gave it a name. It's called Mechthild Angelika Gramstadt-König. So that's the oak tree. And then once we had moved to our apartment and had moved Mechthild to our apartment as well, we were at the forest where my dad is buried, and I took a little sapling from his maple tree where he's buried. So that's our family tree. We're all gonna be buried there. And well, I took a little sapling, took it home, nursed it, gave it a name. It's called Knut Henry König Gramstadt, and they're the both house trees, pretty much. I know, we're weird. I told you so. Now you know why I said that. So we have those tiny little trees back at my patio. They're growing nicely. They're already showing the first signs of spring, having little new buds for fresh, new, wonderful green leaves. So, by the way, once I had transferred my design to the watercolor paper, I went all over the line work with some permanent black marker. Just to have some inked lines and not have any of those graphite lines be super smudgy. So yeah, back to the story. We had those trees and I said, okay, I'm gonna make a crest with that, but there was something missing. And I think I told it last autumn, I'm not sure. But I told you we've got a red robin at my patio. She's living there. We called her Rosie. So she has a name and everything, and she's very much trusting of us. She comes pretty close to us. We gave her food throughout the icy days, and well, she's living with us. So One day we were sitting with our friend group, just joking and everything. And I was talking about, or we were talking about this Crest, this painting that we wanted to do for our shared flat. And I was saying, yeah, I need something more than just those trees on the Crest. I'm not sure yet what I'm going to put there. I don't want to have a spread eagle, as is customary on many crests. I don't want to have that because we don't have a connection to eagles or any other bird pretty much, except, and that is where Jörn jumped in, except for Rosie. We do have a connection with Rosie. So I said, okay, I'm gonna paint or draw in a red robin in kind of a style of a spread eagle. So spread eagles often look to the left and to the right because they look to the past and to the future. And we were just giggling, and I said, you know what? I'm going to paint it this way. Instead of a spread eagle, like with two heads, one looking to the past, one looking to the future, I'm going to do that with a red robin, because that is Rosie, and she's our apartment bird. Now, about 1.5 or 2 weeks later, I think it is. No, it's been 3 weeks at least, 3 or 4 weeks, since we had that conversation with our friends and I was giggling so hard. I finally went on to designing our shared flat crest here with a tree that is half oak, half maple, and our sweet little Rosie at the bottom. And when it came to designing, I wanted it to look stylized, so that is why I drew in those weird branches and leaves. But I also wanted it to look kind of real, so that is why I do have this cloud shape kind of section there behind the leaves on the tree. I will erase that in a minute. I will not ink that part up, but I will paint it in nonetheless. So I'm not having the super stylized crest here only, but having some realism on it, because I also wanted the frame with those little oaks and acorn things, I don't know what they're called. I wanted them to be looking kind of real, like they're made with, well, different kinds of woodwork. Like you would carve out a stamp, you can also carve out shapes in wood, and I wanted it to look that way, and maybe a little more realistic, and that would probably have clashed too much with a cartoony or very stylized tree. So I wanted to have kind of like a mixture, and that is why I do have that cloud-shaped or peach-shaped thing there. So I'm getting to the end of this clip, and you will hear some music now while I show you how I drew / designed that particular crest, how I worked on it.
You told me I'm your anchor, I told you you're my pole. Through the wind and fire we try to hold on. We build this ship together, searching for a home. Despite the storm that hit us, we're still on board. Dancing in the moonlight, the world just stopped and stares. We got no destination, I'll take you anywhere. All the doors we've opened and all the books we've closed, words just come together, story that we never told. So far you're saying for my own, you said just keep holding on. If you're about to break, I'll always be your captain. From our failures we have grown. doors we've opened and all the books we've closed. Words that come together, a story that we never told. So for your sake and for my own, you said just keep holding on. If you're about to break, I'll always be your captain. From our failures we have grown. You said just keep holding on. If you're about to break, I'll always be your captain. Be your captain. I'll always be your captain.
So as you just saw, I took a generic crest with an oak tree as kind of like a reference just for the inner frame of my crest here, and for the tree trunk and some of those branches, the major branches that were tapering off. All the rest from the crest itself, or anything but the bird. From the crest itself, I drew in on my own and designed on my own. And I just pretty much took 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines as a guideline just to speed up the process itself. It took me like 1.5 hours anyway to design that crest, so I wanted to spare myself some time. And while I am watercoloring here with my Academy Schminke watercolors using lemon yellow, a greenish olive, and my trusty indigo blue, I'm gonna explain to you that I also had like a generic spread eagle as a stand-in on the lower part of the crest for me to just position Rosie pretty well. So you saw that I just used the scale or used the eagle as a scale for how big I wanted to draw the double-headed Rosie, and all the rest is pretty much coming from my own imagination. I think it's quite helpful for those geometric lines, especially for the outlines of the crest, to have just a stand-in or like a guideline using different kinds of images. They're generic images. There's no copyright infringement for a crest frame. But anything else I just, well, used on my own, changed it up a little bit and added a lot of stuff. So for the tree trunk here, I started with a light ochre just as an underpainting. I'm gonna go way darker, but I'm only gonna use a couple of colors actually. Let me look at the list. For the Schminke Academy, so the watercolors, I just used 5 different colors. So the lemon yellow, the light ochre, the yellowish olive green, the indigo, and sepia, which is a very dark brown shade in the Schminke Academy watercolors. So I used them like an underpainting pretty much to do the part that I had said earlier, the quote-unquote realistic part, or that is closer to realism than those iconic stylized leaves that are on top of this now green crown of the tree. I'm gonna add way more color later on with a different kind of a medium. I will talk to you then why I add another medium and what the purpose or the idea behind that was. So originally, I had the idea to use masking fluid on these leaves in the middle, so the stylized leaves of both of the trees, as well as those little oaks and whatever the fruit of the maple leaf, the maple tree is, to have them covered with masking fluid so I could be a little more loose with watercolor and still not have those parts be colored like with a dark brown or with a dark green. But last night when I prepared the painting, so when I transferred it to paper and inked up the lines, I realized my my masking fluid had dried, completely dried. So I didn't work with that for almost 3 years because I couldn't work in my old studio for various reasons. And in that time it was really hot in summer and everything dried out. So I didn't have any masking fluid and had to change things up to the point that I could still work or achieve kind of the result that I wanted to achieve. And you just saw here, at first I colored one oak and then I decided, no, I'm gonna go over everything. So I'm working with the same way that I used the tree trunk. So having that light ochre as an underpainting for everything and then going around those oaks and whatever maple fruit, I'm just gonna call it maple fruit, going around those with the sepia and the indigo to have that darker wood, because I wanted the oaks and the maple fruits to be kind of carved out so you can see lighter wood in there. So I wanted to have, or I used the underpainting, otherwise I would have just masked off all of those little fruits and bits and would have painted the dark brown frame first, having that dried and then peeled off the masking fluid, and only then colored or painted the oaks and the maple fruits. But, well, it didn't happen, so I had to change things up just a tiny bit. It was fine. It worked well enough. It was a little hideous to go around all of those fruits, and it would have been a little nicer and maybe a little more comfortable when if I would have been able to use masking fluid. But I just got a new tube of masking fluid delivered. Like an hour after I finished this painting, Amazon rang the doorbell and said, there you are, there's the new masking fluid. So I'm gonna make sure that our apartment doesn't overheat in the next summers, and I can use that masking fluid on many, many, many paintings. But yeah, so that was the original idea and how I changed it up then. I had to adjust just a tiny bit, it was fine, and I decided to work a little differently. So first I had thought, okay, I'm going to use watercolors and I'm going to use maybe a little bit of like neo colors for the more softer, more pastel-like colors that I'm going to add pretty much towards the end. There's like a few tiny details that I add after that, but the neo colors were pretty much the last wet medium that I used. So while I work on those dark frame bits here, I'm working wet on wet with the sepia and the indigo, and I just let it flow into each other depending on what color I have more on my brush, or what is more dominant on the piece of paper that I'm coloring or painting at one point. I go back between indigo and sepia until the richness of the dark wood brown is enough for me. So you can see it actually pretty well here on camera, because I took a photo earlier with just my cell phone, and you couldn't really see the kind of difference between the darker bits, like where there's more indigo, and the more lighter bits where there's more sepia paint, but you can see it pretty well here on camera. I'm impressed. So yeah, I changed it up from just watercolors and a little bit of neo colors and like a gel pen or an ink pen to using watercolors, neo colors, ink tens, colored pencils, and gel pens and ink pens. So I added way more richness because I lost quite a bit of oomph on the dark frame here because I had to paint around the oaks and the maple fruit and couldn't work with the masking fluid. But that was fine. It just meant that I had to add a few more steps. It actually wasn't as bad on the frame itself, but on the leaves on the tree, I had to add way more pigment to just have them pop out. Because I wanted that crown of the tree, that cloudy kind of shape. I wanted that to be like the backdrop and wanted the leaves to be a little more bright and colorful and prominent and in the foreground. So I had to add, speak slowly, Sarah. I had to add way more pigment and make it way more brighter and colorful for that to work. You can see here I'm going over the letters G and K. I'm gonna disregard them for now. I'm gonna come back to them at the very end of the video when I bring in my gel pen. So I could still see the ink lines underneath. So though this looks pretty dark here on the screen, I could still see the ink lines and I didn't have to worry on losing my sketch underneath and trying to figure out later on with a gel pen that you cannot erase and cannot smudge and all of that on where to put my letters. I could still see them, so I could just go over the black ink lines in the very end. But I'm gonna get to that later on. For now, I'm still making my way around the frame with lots of sepia and indigo, which I think makes for a very nice dark, rich brown. I do like to combine dark brown with a dark blue and have one of them be on the cooler part of the spectrum and the other one be on the warmer part of the spectrum. So in this case, I used a cool brown and a warm blue. And I think that is my all-time favorite color combination when it comes to shading. I mean, I say it so often, pretty much in every video on Beyond the Lines, which is my coloring format. I say it so often that I use a lot of brown and indigo for shading. Indigo is my favorite shading colors, and this dark sepia or walnut brown is pretty much my second favorite shading color. If I need even more richer shades of in my shadows, I tend to use a Payne's Gray and a purple, one that is smack on in the middle between a cold and a warm purple, and I just really like it. But most times I don't actually need as many colors. I just need two, at least for, let's say, smaller objects that I'm shading. But I also like the color combo of brown and blue for anything that is supposed to be wood. So I use it frequently when I paint, draw, or color anything that is wood. And as you can see here, the frame around the crest is supposed to be wood. So there, the light ochre sections, the maple fruit and the oak, are pretty much carved out of wood. That's the impression that you're supposed to get, or that is what my imagination made our crest look like. And in the end, there's always ugly stages of a painting. This is pretty much ugly stage here, but I can trust myself enough to say, okay, I'm just going to keep working and I know it will come together and the frame won't look too stark and too dark in comparison to that very light fluffy tree. I meanwhile know that I can make it work and it comes together beautifully in the end, but during that time of painting, it just looks so ugly and it looks disproportionate and it looks like the frame around that tree is pretty much like, I don't know, a metal chain or something. It's very constrictive. but it doesn't in the end. So I will show you later on how I make it work. But for now, excuse me. But for now, I'm just going all around and make a perfect brown and blue frame. So after that, I dried off my page and moved on to Inktense. They are kind of a little bit chalky, and there were some things I didn't like too much on top of the watercolors that bugged me more on this painting than they bug me on other paintings that I do. And I guess it's just because I do have those very translucent watercolors that are very smooth and kind of glossy almost, right next to the very opaque and almost chalky looking Inktense pencils. But I just chose a couple of shades and a smaller brush to color the stylized leaves on the tree. So for my side, the maple side, I'm using a little bit of lemon yellow, which I didn't use on Jörn's oak tree. So the reason why I changed those things up, or I made a difference there in comparison to having the crown of the tree with the watercolors being colored the same way and being colored as one. With those leaves here, I make a difference because I want to emphasize it's two trees and it's two people in this shared flat that, well, are represented by that crest. So I made my leaves a little more yellowish, a little more lighter, a little more vibrant. Because, well, I think a maple tree just represents something totally different than an oak tree. An oak tree is a very slow-growing, very strong, very sturdy kind of a tree. And a maple tree is quite bright and fluffy and maybe a little more whimsical and fast-witted kind of a tree. So those trees actually kind of represent Jörn's and my quality, like personal qualities, like quality traits or character traits, at least some of them. And I wanted to have that depicted in my crest here as well. So I did add a little bit of a lighter yellowish green on top, but the lemon yellow underneath dried too quickly and I had trouble getting them blended together. At which point I decided, okay, I'm gonna add a few more shades of a little more of a darker olivey kind of a green shade and just blend those colors together. And that was also the point where I decided, okay, I'm going to put another medium on top just to make sure that those stylized leaves do pop out a little more. So they're definitely visible right now, but they blend too much with the crown of the tree in the background for my personal taste. And I kind of wanted them to move into the foreground a little bit more. So that is when I thought, okay, I'm gonna add another medium on top and I'm not gonna worry about it. For now, I'm just going to blend my Inktense blocks here as well as I can. For a little while, I had thought I would maybe use the Inktense pencils for this piece here, but I decided not to, because with the Inktense pencils on this kind of structured, textured paper, sometimes you have a lot of pigment in the creases of the paper, and then when you go over it with water, especially on these smaller sections that I'm just coloring now, it looks kind of blotchy in the end. And with the blocks, I could liquefy the pigment beforehand and then only put it onto the paper. So that is why I decided, okay, I'm not going to use the pencils. So though maybe putting pigment down would have been a little bit easier, but I'm going the extra mile here and do a little more work and use the blocks just for me to make sure that There's no blotchy look on those leaves here in particular. But also, I was kind of afraid actually that I wouldn't be able to shade the oaks and the maple fruit on the frame very well because they're tiny, honestly. So I had thought, okay, I'm just gonna dip my brush in a little bit of a mustard color and just shade those pieces of the frame a little more. And I think it was a good choice that I went for the blocks and not the pencils for this one. So for Jörn's side here, I'm using the same kind of light green that I used, so that yellowish light green that I also used on my leaves. I'm using that on his leaves, like a solid layer, and then I'm bringing in a little bit of the indigo to have a little bit more of an interest and shading going on the oak leaves here. So he has way better defined leaves at this point. If you compare them to my maple leaves, they're kind of hard to find on the background actually. But I didn't want to use indigo on my leaves at this point, and I kind of wanted to have them look differently from the colors that I had chosen for both of the sides of the tree there. So I went around the crown of the tree, the fluffy part, with a little bit of very much watered down indigo, just to, darken it up, give the crown of the tree like a frame or an end, a border. And I wanted the tree to look darker on the outside and be a little lighter towards the trunk, so towards the midsection of the crown of the tree. So I went around all of the tree here and bring in some indigo. Now, indigo. So now when Inktense pencils or blocks are dried, you can't smudge the color anymore. You can't move the pigment anymore. But you can move watercolors. So later on, you will actually see me go in with just a clear brush with a little bit of water on it, rather damp instead of a wet brush. And I will just move the watercolor pigment underneath in the middle of the tree a tiny little bit to not have this tree look, here we go, not have this tree look so quote-unquote framey. So I didn't want another frame there, and the blue and green part of the tree were just too separate for my personal taste. So I just went in with a damp brush and moved some of that green watercolor around, and it did actually blend with the indigo Inktense pretty well. So then I moved on to my little red robin, aka Rosie. And I just gave her a very watered down coloring with just a little bit of terracotta, indigo, and a Payne's gray. And I watered down the Payne's gray. I watered it down so much to make it a light gray, as you can see here. Because, well, she's pretty light and she's fluffy, and I didn't want there to be a very dark gray. But also I wanted to have some range where I could intensify colors later on with the colored pencils, because again, I had said just a minute or 5 ago that I would add a little bit of colored pencil on top. So I didn't want to go too dark and have it look like a plastic or a stamp or something. I wanted it to look kind of real, as if it would have been maybe carved out of wood and painted then. So that was the look I was going for. Added a second layer of the terracotta just to make sure not one color does overpower the other and one is bright and then the other isn't, because, well, actually the terracotta bits should be the most colorful and bright bit of the red robin. I didn't draw in the eyes at the very beginning when I took the sketch, because I knew I would add the eyes at the very end. So I'm just coloring the bird itself, including the peak, and I need to sneeze. I'm sorry. Woo. So after Rosie had her Inktense treatment, I went to using a little bit of a mustard shade, to also very much watered down, by the way, to shade the oaks and the maple fruit a tiny bit, and I shaded them towards the bottom of the crest, not necessarily having them shaded on the same parts of the oaks. So you can see they're angled into all different kinds of directions, and I always went for the lower part of the complete crest and didn't just regard each oak on its own at that point. So just very quickly going around all of these carved out pieces of wood that are pretty tiny, and bringing those together, just adding a little more oomph to them. And I took a very, very small brush. Though I like to work with the biggest brush I can work with for a certain painting, there's some parts where I very much prefer small brushes, and that is in particular the case when I do already have my ink lines down. So if I say I use watercolor only on a painting first and then later on bring in some ink for some sketching or some lines, I do like the big brushes, but as big as possible. But when I do the reverse thing and have my ink lines down and then only bring in watercolor, I kind of tend to use a little smaller brushes. So at this point here, I went on to my Caran d'Ache Neocolor 2. They are a water-soluble crayon, and they do have quite the soft, almost pastel-like shades in there that I do not have in my watercolors, and that I do not want to use from the Inktense because they are just so bright and intense. So I went on to Caran d'Ache and used a very light and pastel-looking Sahara yellow for the part inside the crest that is behind the tree. So pretty much the backdrop behind our apartment tree. And at this point, the painting has very much yellow tones and warm shades. So I went on and did something that I hardly ever do, but I painted a backdrop behind the crest, and I wanted to have a blue shade, and one that is on the cool part of the spectrum and not the light part. So I had two crayons that would have fit either a sky blue or ultramarine blue. And I went for ultramarine because the sky blue was just very, very light. You could probably hardly see it on the paper. So I decided, okay, I'm going to go with a stronger color, water it down quite a bit so that I have a soft, light blue backdrop or background here behind the crest. And that does two things for me. For one, it kind of expands the world of the crest. So it's not just like a pin that you just painted with watercolor, so there's no harsh lines when it comes to this is where the painting ends, but it has a very soft extension of that, so there's almost like a very light shadow or a backdrop or something. And also it works a different way. It cools down the painting a bit, and it enhances the balance between warm colors and cold colors. So that is why I wanted to have a little more of a cool tone there. I do have the cool brown. I do have the cool gray, so the Payne's gray. But all the other colors are way more towards the warmer part of the spectrum, except I just remembered for the lemon yellow. So there's another cool shade. But you know what I mean? I wanted to have a little more of a balance going on when it comes to the cold and warm colors, and therefore I used the ultramarine backdrop. So once I had dried everything off, I grabbed my polychromos and started with my trusty dark indigo, folks. The tiniest pencil in my pencil case at this point. I'm gonna have to replace it very soon. And I went around the crown of the tree, so the fluffy part, and just outlined it with a very tiny little bit of the indigo, just to have it still look fluffy, but also have kind of like an edge or a framework or a frame of the fluffy part of the tree. So I wanted it to have very clear outlines but still be fluffy, and I think I did achieve that pretty well with just adding a tiny little bit of the indigo pencil. Then I went on to the leaves and I started shading on top of the indigo that I had used with the Inktense, and just intensified that in a very controlled manner with my colored pencils. So that is also one thing why I decided to bring in colored pencils on top. Watercolors or Inktense are not as well controllable as when it comes to where they go as colored pencils. Colored pencils are the most controllable medium there is, I think. So since you apply them in a dry fashion and you don't use water with them, pigment can flow where you don't want it to flow. And even if you have dried off your paper a little bit and it's not really wet, but only just a slightly bit damp on one spot, the color will go there if you have a liquid medium, because that is what watercolors and ink colors like Inktense, what they do, you know? So I wanted to have a little more of an outline and a little more of a controlled way to shade the leaves, especially the little oaks and maple fruit on the frame of the crest. So I decided I will just do my best with the Inktense to have them on the paper, have quote-unquote halfway controllable pigment there. The watercolor, the way I painted, was the least controllable. Inktense was a little more controllable. And of course the polychromos are super controllable. So I just added a tiny little bit here and there, very soft layers, outlined some of those leaf parts too. And I pretty much covered up the ink lines that I had underneath. And when I came to the maple side, as you can see here, I'm using 2 shades of dark green, one cool one, one warm one, and a cool yellow, which is again lemon yellow, and a tiny little bit of indigo to color in and make my maple leaves pop against the fluffy crown of the tree. So pretty much the backdrop. And also there I was able to cover up all of my ink lines from before. And I think that part in particular makes this crest look a little less cartoonish and a little more realistic. True, you see the ink lines on the tree trunk and the branches, but I will go on top of those, especially the branches. I think I didn't do the tree trunk, but the branches, with a sepia pencil. And just the tiny little bit helps. The ink lines won't be covered up completely, not at all, but they will have a dark brown shimmer on top. And that is enough to make this tree all in all look less cartoony and a little more realistic. Though I do have major inclines visible in the end. And I think I liked that in particular, how that turned out for the style of the tree. So in the very beginning of the video, I had said I wanted a little more of a realistic part looking kind of a crest and not just a stylized or very quote-unquote cartoony or icon-y looking kind of crest. And I think I managed to achieve that, in particular with the tree. So I really like that. I still do have my inclines in there, and they're still pretty visible, but they fit together with the stylized form of the tree leaves, and frankly also rosy. So I think it's just the right balance for me when it comes to realistic and stylized kind of painting slash artwork slash drawing slash fill in the blank. So yeah, I'm just going back and forth between all of my pencils and just adding and adding and adding lots and lots and lots of layers and pigment there. Because I had to work a little more on the maple leaves to bring them to the foreground in comparison to the oak leaves. They were way more visible against the fluffy crown of the tree. With the maple leaves, that was a little different, so I had to work a little more to make them pop. But I think in the end, both parts of the tree do come together pretty nicely. One sort of tree doesn't overshadow the other one. The difference between color selection and how much pigment I put down isn't too big. It seems like, or at least it looks like to me, as if they're equally popping out on the respective parts of the tree. And I will add a tiny little bit of I think it is May green. You can see the pencil already lying there on the very left-hand side of the screen. I will add a little bit of that very light May green to the oak leaves in a minute, just to make the green part of the oak leaves pop a little more. You can see here, that's what I'm talking about. And bring all of those stylized kind of leaves together. And then I went on, I think, to sepia and went over the branches with my pencil, and it really makes a difference. You can hardly see it here on camera, but in real life it makes a difference. Also, as I just realized, I colored in one more branch that I had forgotten when I watercolored the tree trunk and the branches. I just took indigo and sepia and colored that in. And for the rest of the branches, like I had said, I just used another layer of sepia. And after that, I think I went to Rosie next. And for her, I used a little bit of terracotta for the red part on her belly. And I used a little bit of indigo and Payne's Gray for the rest of the bird. And no, I went to the oaks and the maple fruit first. So I just used, I think it is called Naples Yellow Dark. I think that is what the pencil is. But, you know, you can read up on what exact colors I used on this painting, which brands of watercolor and what blocks of Inktense, which number, blah, blah, blah. You can all read that up on my blog. The post will go live once this video is done here. So in case you're watching at 9 a.m. Central European time on Monday, once this video is done, the blog post will be popping up and will be live, so you can read up on what exactly I used. But as you can see, I used different shades of blue and gray here to just emphasize a couple of bits of rosy, and I also smudged pencil on my paper where it's not supposed to go. So my trusty eraser came in, and I'm just intensifying a few things. I'm leaving a couple of bits quite uncolored when it comes to the polychromos, and have a lot of the Inktense peek through. And then I went over several bits with my Copic multiliner, and I also drew in the eyes already from Rosie. Just went back to outlining the oaks and the maple fruit. And at the for the very last bit, I will use a gold gel pen and go around certain things. So anything on the dark frame I will outline, which is, but really just outline, not going over all of the black ink lines that I'm currently drawing back in here, just to have a little more of a pop-up and a difference. Because when you color with watercolor on top of ink, the ink gets kind of chalky or milky, and I just went back in and drew my ink lines back in. But I'm just going to outline all of the oaks and the maple fruit in a minute, and also the leaves on the tree, and Rosie will get golden eyes because she is a very particular bird and she's not gonna have white. I didn't want to introduce another color to this painting. And frankly, when you look at what colors were used on Crests, they used a lot of gold or silver for well, detailed parts, and I didn't want to add white gel pen to it. I think it would have looked weird, especially because the painting has quite the yellow tint, so I thought gold would just work way, 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 way better. And you can tell me in the comments below if you agree with me or not, because you will see it in a minute. So yeah, I'm just adding a couple of details here, just bringing back a few lines, making him shimmer, because I thought maybe somebody carved all of that and then went around the carved out pieces and just added a little tiny little bit of gold there to make it nice and finished and well, maybe a little more sophisticated looking. So I just did that with my gel pen, because why not? And once that is done, my painting is done. Which leads me into thanking you for watching. If you have any questions or comments, I would love for you to write them in the comment section below. I will get to you and answer you as quickly as I can. If you want me to draw, paint, whatever, anything in particular in upcoming videos, let me know in the comment section as well. Or if you want a certain medium, if you want to see that, if you maybe, I don't know, anything but oil, because I don't have oil paints. I'm not using them a lot because yeah, they're just too slow for me, but that's another kind of story. If you want, say, a watercolor painting, or if you maybe want to see something with acrylics or mixed media, let me know. If you have requests, I will very much like to work on that for you, because, you know, you have a voice on my channel, guys. Other than that, if you liked this video, I would very much appreciate if you'd give it a thumbs up, because that lets me know that I'm on the right track and that you like what you see. And if you're new to the channel, for one, welcome, 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 and please consider hitting that subscribe button and clicking the bell for notifications. Also peruse the channel. There's lots of different kinds of art videos and board game videos and vlogs and podcasts and videos for disability and all of that on my channel. There's different kinds of shows that I produced or still produce, and you're very welcome to cruise the channel. I would love that a lot. I will see you in 2 weeks back on ArtDay, and thank you very much for watching. Have a lovely, lovely day, and I hope you have time to maybe do some artwork yourself. Would be awesome. I would be very happy for you. So take good care. Have fun. Bye.